We're glad to be here tonight and to be able to continue in our series of lessons that we began on Wednesday evening. And we have entitled this series, Getting a Life and Loving It. You know, so many people, as we have mentioned throughout this particular series, are not really people who enjoy existing on this earth. They merely go through the motions, they make a living, and I guess they say that everything is going to end when they die, and that's it. And so therefore life to them is not something to be enjoyed, not something to be desired, not something to be loved, but rather life is really a drudgery. And, you know, I think that the reason that people feel that way is that they have failed to make the connection between having the kind of life that you can love and having a relationship with God. The only way that we can have a life that we can love is to be in fellowship with the one who made us and gave us our life. And that is the only one that we can make sure that we understand how to enjoy our life is through Jesus Christ. And so in our first lesson we talked about how that life really begins when we come to the cross, when we make some acknowledgments, when we begin to understand that sin is what separates us and keeps us from living life to its fullest, what keeps us from enjoying life and being a person who actually looks forward to the dawning of each and every day. And you see, sin is what separates us from God. But God, even in His infinite wisdom and His love, sent forth His Son to die for us. And so we find that if we will accept that substitutionary death, and whenever you think of Christ on the cross, think in terms of the substitutionary. That is, that we have one in place of another. Jesus had no sin. He had not done anything wrong. And so therefore, when He went and paid the wages of sin, whose wages was He paying? Not His own. He could pay ours. And so therefore, He died in our place, in our stead, and by accepting then that grace that was given to us, we can deal with sin. And so we are then forgiven. We are justified. We are declared not guilty. And, you know, that's a marvelous thing, isn't it? To know that we are justified by the blood of Christ. That everything that we have said, everything that we have done, every thought that we have had, that all of those things have been passed away. And now we are new creatures in Christ. And then we talked last evening about if we're going to have a life and really love it, we're going to have to learn how to deal with sin in our life as God's people. Understanding and realizing that we are, of course, each and every day bombarded by that which is evil. Our minds are always absorbing, just like a sponge, many, many things that are out here in the world that are not part of God's plan for us. And we cannot help but for a moment become, influenced by those things, by those external stimuli. Things we watch on TV, the things that we read in the newspaper, books and magazines that we might subscribe to, conversations that we might have. There's a lot of ungodliness in the world. Not all of those things are ungodly if they're used rightfully and correctly, but Satan has certainly found a good way to use them in an ungodly way. And so what happens is we absorb all of that, and it begins to impact us. So we talked last night about how to overcome temptation, how to overcome those weak moments that we have so that we won't go through life feeling like we've let God down, feeling like we have failed in some way. So as the first lesson, to get a life and love it, you've got to come to the cross. To get a life and love it, lesson number 2, what we have to do, we had to learn how to handle sin, how to make sure that we keep ourselves as pure and as holy as we possibly can for our Creator's sake. Now tonight, I told you last evening, and for those who weren't with us, we said that we were going to talk about what to do when other people do us wrong. You know, I guess that a lot of times, and if you listen very, very carefully to people, generally they like to blame their problems on a lot of other people, don't they? And, one of the things that we'll find people saying is the reason they are as they are is because this is the way their parents did them, or this is what a friend did to them, or this is what a wife or spouse did to them. And, I'm not denying that we are not treated many times in ways which we ought not to be. But I guess, and I'm just suspecting here, don't want to sound judgmental, that more than likely you have probably treated others in ways that they weren't deserving of either. So what I want us to do is to look and see how it is that we can learn to handle the hurts that we experience at the hands of other people. And many times, one of the things that we often find is that those people that we find our hurts from may be people we don't know, or it may be someone very, very close to us. It may be a good friend. It may be a husband or a wife. It may be a parent. It may be a co-worker. But the point is if you've lived very much on this earth, you've been hurt. And if you live very much longer on this earth, guess what? You're going to be hurt again. And you cannot allow those hurts in life to rob you of living life to its fullest. You can't allow those hurts, when other people do you wrong, to keep you from having a life that you can love. Because you see, if you do, then you're going to go through life miserable, not hurting anyone else in that sense because of your misery, but simply tormenting yourself, simply tearing yourself all apart and doing damage to you. You know, it's just like I said last night. When somebody begins to harbor in their heart hatred toward another, when somebody begins to hold ill will within themselves towards somebody else, you know who gets hurt? We often think by me having that hateful attitude or having that ill will towards somebody else that I'm punishing them. Did you know that the majority of people that we have ill will toward don't even know it? They don't even know that we have it. Because we've never told it to them. You know, we go away with our feelings hurt, licking our wounds, whining and pouting and griping, and they don't even know it because we don't say it to them. And so who is it then that this hurt hurts? Well, it destroys us. Hatred does not destroy the person whom you hate. Hatred destroys the person who harbors it within their heart. And so as long as you then respond incorrectly toward the hurts that you have received or will receive or are even receiving right now, you're never going to have a life that you can really say, I love. You're never going to be able to say to yourself or to somebody else, you know, I really love my life. And I'm glad that I'm alive. And I'm glad that I'm living. And even if you're on your deathbed, you'll be able to say, and this is what we should hope for, is to be able to say, you know, I'm glad I lived. I loved my existence. But if we have the inability to handle our hurts, if we're not able to deal with those difficult and adverse things that people do and say to us and about us, then we're going to be miserable. And so this lesson tonight is, what can we do when others do us wrong? What is it that I ought to do? How should I ought to respond? If you have your Bibles, I would like for you to take and turn with me to 2 Timothy chapter 4. 2 Timothy chapter 4, and we want to begin with about verse number 6. And we're going to be looking here at what we find the Apostle Paul writing to a young man by the name of Timothy. He says in verse number 6, For I'm already being poured out, or I'm already being offered as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. He says, For I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith, and finally there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. He then tells Timothy, he says, Be diligent to come to me quickly. Now let's stop here just a moment and realize why it is that Paul is writing to Timothy at this particular time. Well, one of the things that he's doing is he's telling Timothy about what he should be doing as an evangelist. But at the same time, Paul is in prison. Historically, he is in prison. If you remember, Paul's troubles began when he left Judaism, when he became a Christian, and he began to preach Christ and him crucified. There were people who were in the church didn't want to accept him because before he'd been taking the Christians and having them killed. And then when he switched, those whom he had, of course, been friends with before, now had turned against him because they considered him to be a traitor. And then we find that in addition to that, Paul did almost the unspeakable. He preached to the Gentiles. He baptized Gentile people. He allowed the Gentiles to fellowship with the Jews who had accepted Christ in the church. And that really, really hurt some people. So Paul had a lot of trouble. And he would go into a city and he would preach and he would convert a lot of people through the Word. And then the Jewish leaders would rise up in opposition to him, take him, beat him, try to kill him, do all kinds of things to him, drive him out of the city. And so finally, Paul appears before the Sanhedrin. Finally, Paul gets arrested, and he appeals as a Roman citizen to Nero. Nero was the emperor historically at this particular time. And as a Roman citizen, he had the right to take this to the highest power in Rome. And so he says, I want to appeal to Nero. And I tell you what, a lot of times people think, well, you reckon Paul was doing that because he thought if he could win Nero over to his side of the story, he would get off and die. No, I don't think that's what Paul was doing. Paul wanted an opportunity to preach the gospel to the highest power in the Roman Empire. And that's exactly what he did. Now, it's not recorded for us, but I know he did, because he went to the governor, and he preached there, if you remember. He preached King Agrippa to Felix. Why do you think he'd hold back on Nero? And more than likely, what he said to Nero wasn't too much better than what he said to the others, and he says, I know I'm ready to be offered. The time of my departure is at hand. So Paul is in prison. He is waiting that court appearance. By his own words that we've just read, he knows that more than likely he's not going to come out of this alive. I'm ready to be offered. The actual Greek translation says, I am already being poured out as a drink offering. That's the actual Greek word-for-word translation. I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. Already being sacrificed, he says. And I fought the good fight. I've kept the faith. And he says, I'm waiting for that crown. Now, as he pens this to Timothy, he says, now, Timothy, come to me quickly. Because I'm sure he was lonely. Because look at what else he says here. See, Paul had been hurt by some whom he knew and whom he had loved. Look at what he says. Be diligent to come to me quickly. For Demas. Now, this is one of Paul's companions. In some of the other epistles that Paul writes, he mentions Demas as his fellow worker, as his fellow laborer, as his helper. But here at this particular time, and I don't know the ins and outs really, what it was that drove Demas to do it. All Paul said was this, having loved this present world. Notice Demas' mindset was wrong from the beginning here in this situation, because he might have been afraid of being put in jail. He might have been afraid of martyrdom. He might have been afraid that he too was going to be offered. So he said, hey, Paul, I got to split. I can't stay here with you because they're liable to cut my head off too. It might be that there was a particular sin. I don't know what it was, but it was the fact that Demas was being awfully nearsighted. See what I'm saying? He wasn't looking far enough away and realizing that his life was going to end someday anyway. And it better end with him faithful in God and in Christ, but rather he loved this present world. How many of us would this also describe? How many of us, if God were to come down right now and write out a one-sentence statement about us, would have to say, this person has forsaken me because they love this world? Why our church house is not filled? Because many people who call themselves Christians are what? They've left God and forsaken Him for this world. Why do many people who know the truth not obey it? Because they have forsaken their Creator for love of this world. See what I'm saying? That's a terrible tragedy. But the Apostle Paul was definitely hurt by this one who had really worked with him closely, who had been a friend, a fellow laborer, and a minister with him. He says, for Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and departed for Thessalonica, Crescens, for Galatia, Titus, for Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. He said, Luke's the only one hanging tight right now. He says, get Mark, bring him with you. For he is useful to me for ministry. Tychicus I have sent to Ephesus. Bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas when you came, and the books, and especially the parchments. Look at this. Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. Now, Paul's being hurt by enemies out. He's being hurt by friends within. He says, may the Lord repay him according to his works. You also must beware of him, for he has greatly resisted our words. At my first defense, no one stood with me, but all forsook me. May it not be charged against them. But the Lord stood with me and strengthened me, so that the message might be preached fully through me, and that all the Gentiles might hear. Also, I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion, and the Lord will deliver me when the time comes as well. Now, so what we find, and you may not see it at first glance, and you know, this is the marvelous thing about the Bible story and the way that the Bible is put together. God can have and has given us so many lessons in just what we might at first read and think really doesn't say much of anything. This just seems like pretty much a historical narrative, right? Here I'm in prison, I tell you what, we might say, well, I don't even feel comfortable reading this. This is Paul writing to his good friend Timothy, and he's just writing some personal things. But do you realize that wedged in here are some principles about what to do when you've been hurt? Paul says a lot. And what we have been left to do is to extract from these verses. Our jobs as students of the Bible are like miners. We are to mine the Word and pull from it those precious gems of truth that we can utilize that will shape us and conform us and transform us into the image of Christ. See, that's what it's about. That's why we're here tonight. We're not here to be entertained. We're not here necessarily because we have nothing else to do. We're not here because we're afraid that the good people might talk about us if we're not amongst this number. That's not why we're here. We ought to be here tonight with our ears open, our hearts attentive, and a true desire to what? Hear from God. Not hear from me, hear from God. One of the greatest things that anyone can do is to come before this holy, awesome, and powerful God and allow Him to speak directly to you through His Word. That's what He's doing. He's talking to us tonight. And He is showing us some wonderful things. So, what do you do when somebody does you wrong? What do you do when a friend somehow hurts you? What do you do when a business associate does something underhanded, gets you in trouble, or treats you bad? What do you do when your wife or husband cheats on you and some indiscretion somehow, some way lets you down? Or one of your children, or your neighbor, or even somebody in the church? What do you do? Is there anything that we can find here? Well, yeah, there is. There's some wonderful, wonderful principles that we can glean from this particular passage. That's what I want us to look at. All right, principle number one. If you're going to really have a life that you can love, you've got to learn to live that life for an audience of one. Now, I want you to let this soak in for a moment. So many times, much of our hurt and disappointment is not necessarily at what other people have done to us, but many times it's what they have failed to do to us or for us. We get a promotion. And we come in and we tell somebody, I've got this promotion and I've got this or that. And they say, well, that's nice. And then they go on. Well, now you hurt, right? One man comes home, she's had her hair fixed. And, I've been trying. I've been trying. Because usually I never noticed it. And she'd have to say, finally, well, didn't you notice my hair? And, I'd get that deer in the headlight look, what about it? I did that. And then, that's what happened. So the other day, she come in, and I said, man, your hair looks nice. You get it fixed? She said, no. So she hadn't even gone. I can't keep up with it. I thought I was going to beat her to the draw on that one, but I didn't. But, sometimes by failing to acknowledge or failing to do what we expect other people to do for us or how they ought to react to us. You know what I'm saying? We all want to be respected. We all want to feel important. We all want to feel like people care for us, etc., etc., etc. Let me tell you something. As long as you go through life allowing your emotional stability to be dependent upon other people's reactions towards you or attitudes about you, you're going to be miserable. See what I'm saying? You're going to be miserable. Because one thing I found about people is that they change just like the wind does. And one minute they love you, and the same person the next minute can say something hateful. So, my sense of worth is not determined by your awareness of me. I need to learn to live my life for an audience of one. Who in the long run does it really matter what they think? Who's the only one that it really matters what they think when it's all said and done? Right? That's the audience of one you ought to be living for. Not trying to impress this one or that one, because sometimes they'll acknowledge it, and then sometimes they might not. Sometimes they might see it, sometimes they might not. Have you ever heard somebody say, I did this and so and so? They never even said thank you. See if I do anything like that to them again. See, many times what we're doing is that we're doing it because we want this appraisal of men. Right? But it's the living for the audience of one principle. Does Paul teach that in this passage? Through verse 6. What's he say? He says, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith." He talks about his faithfulness. He says, "And finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness." Notice he's talking about the approval. Who gives that approval and that crown of righteousness? What's he say? Which who? Look at it. Which the Lord, the righteous judge. Notice, the one who is able to evaluate your true worth. See, not an apparent worth, not a worth based on the opinion and the estimates of everybody around about you, but the true worth that you have, the true judge of righteousness. And that's God. The righteous judge will give me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. So, I guess what we're saying here is, principle number one, you want to live a life that you can love, deal with your hurts, first of all, by avoiding many of them, by living for an audience of one. Oh, it's nice when they pat you on the back and hug your neck and tell you how great you are. But I tell you what, if that's what you live for, then when they don't pat you on the back, hug your neck and tell you how great you are, you're going to feel miserable. But when you know that you are living in accordance to the will of God and in accordance to His truth, and you do that day in and day out, then it doesn't really matter whether they're hugging your neck, patting you back, telling you how great you are. See what I'm saying? You know that you have God's approval. And as long as God approves of you, what else do you need? Because in the final analysis, the judgment trumpet's going to sound, the judgment scene is going to be set, me and you and everybody else that's ever lived, ever yet will live, will come before Him, and He will judge us individually. So then every one of us must give account of himself before God. Every one of us must give an account of who? Everybody else? No, of himself before God. For we must, Paul said in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 10, all appear before the judgment seat of Christ to give an answer for everything that we've done in this body, whether it be good or whether it be bad. So again, here's what we found. If you want to deal with hurts, avoid many of them by living for an audience of one. Learn to do that. It's hard. It's really hard. But the audience that you should live for is Jesus Christ. The second thing is this. Learn and realize that humans often act like humans. Really, when it's all said and done, we all act the same ways, don't we? Isn't it funny that we often have a big, high standard for everybody but ourselves? You ever notice we do that? I remember years ago there was a guy at one of the churches back home who was mad at a different person every Sunday because they didn't shake his hand. And, one of those days, I was a boy, so I wasn't allowed to say anything like that. I'd been slapped if I did, but I always wouldn't say, well, why didn't you shake theirs? It goes both ways. You know what I'm saying? But see, we expect everybody else, right, to be the way they are, or, way we want them to be. So I don't have to live like that. So the point of it is realize that none of us have shiny, undented armor. Okay, our armor is tarnished, and there are chinks in it. There's some rust that's hit that, and mine's no worse than yours, and yours no worse than mine. Realize that humans are going to be humans. If I think that somebody is above ever doing anything wrong, when I think of them then, or catch them, or see them, or perceiving them something wrong, it's like, People do that with preachers a lot. You ever notice that? They think that if you preach that you're not human. You know, you never get mad. You never want to laugh. You don't tell a joke. You don't want to do this or you don't want to do that. I reckon they think that, it's kind of like the little kids are with teachers. You're at the store? They didn't think teachers came to stores. It just blew their mind when they see a teacher at a store. I guess they thought they stayed there at the schoolhouse, there behind the desk. I guess that most people think that all a preacher does is walk around like this. Got my Bible and I'm being holy. We ain't ever going to mess up. So that when somebody does, then what they do is they think, wow. That's horrible. Look, man. And we got to understand, people are people, aren't they? We all are tainted by, we all are influenced by sin. We live in a fallen world. And we are confined to this flesh that Satan just pulls around at will, if we let him. So what we have to do is to realize that humans are human. So therefore, when somebody does something that hurts your feelings, chalk it up to them being human. Instead of getting all bent out of joint, just chalk it up to the fact that, well, that's typical. They're just human like I am. They probably didn't mean nothing by it. And I think that Paul tells us that's going to happen. In fact, friendships, partnerships, all these other things, they sour. Why? Well, in this we find some reasons, and it all shows us that this is the way people are. Take, for example, this. Demas. Why did Demas leave Paul? Because of the love of worldly temptations, right? People hurt you because of the love of worldly temptations. They hurt Paul for that. The loss of the common purpose that they shared was also a loss. Demas lost the vision for the gospel. Paul still maintained it. That hurt Paul. You notice he mentions Mark here? You remember that? You remember the episode with Mark and Barnabas? There was Paul and Barnabas and Mark getting ready to go on a missionary journey. And I don't know, the book of Acts doesn't tell us why, but Barnabas and Paul had no small dissension over Mark. And so finally it got so great, the strife between them was so strong, that Barnabas takes Mark and goes off his way, Paul goes off the other. They part company. Now whatever it was, I don't know. But I'm glad by this time, what's Paul say about Mark? He said, he's useful for me. So apparently that all been passed over, But at one time, Paul was hurt with Mark. Probably Mark's immaturity. And then there is personal deception. Notice, can you catch that in Paul's words there? He says, only Luke is with me. Everybody is gone but Luke. I'm sure he was very thankful for him. But we all act like humans. Don't expect too much. Don't paint a picture of someone, to where you think that this person will never ever let you down. Because they will. I can't promise you I'll never let you down. You can't promise me that. I can't promise my wife or children that. I'll do my best not to. You know what I'm saying? But I'm human. You're human. And we're weak. So I think that we won't be hurt near as bad when we realize that we all share in this common weakness. Chalk it up to human existence. Thirdly, you deal with your hurts by resisting, notice that's you taking the initiative, by resisting any evil resentment or a desire to pay back the one who's wronged you. Now, that's a natural instinct, isn't it? They hurt me, I'm going to get them. You just wait. Next time I get a chance, I'm going to let them have it. You know what I mean? You ever heard people say, let's forget about people saying, you ever said anything like that? Wait a minute. And have you ever plotted how you're going to just wait? You're just lying in wait. Because somebody's hurt you, and you're lying in wait for them to do something so you can pounce. And you plan for weeks the speech you're going to give them. All the words that will come out, Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you get an opportunity, sometimes you don't. But The point of it is that it is not ours to harbor the resentment, nor is it ours to repay. Don't you do that. Okay? There's where you're going to become infected and become an instrument for Satan. Look at what Paul said in verse 14. Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. He hurt him. But what's he say? Paul says, I'm going to get him. Read that. Is that what he said? Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm, and I'm going to get him. You just wait. If I ever get out of this jail, he's a dead man. Is that what Paul said? Paul didn't say it. Look at that. What's he say? Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. The Lord will repay him. See, the Lord's the only one who can. Because the Lord's the only one who can determine whether he needs repaid or not. See the point? So what we have to do is to understand that the Lord is the one who will reap vengeance. Let me tell you something. You know, every now and then we get all up in the air. We'll see a trial on TV where some judge lets some child molester go or some murderer just turn them loose. And, you know, we go and say, look at what that person got by with. Let me tell you something. There isn't anyone getting by with anything. Okay? Let me say that again. There's no one getting by with anything. Why? Because there is a day known as the day of restitution of all things. Oh, yes, we might miss one here and there. You know, and there might be some horrendous and atrocious crime that we miss, but let me tell you something, the eye of God misses nothing. And besides, it'll be worse when he gets a hold of them than anything we can do. So nobody gets by with nothing. The Apostle Paul wrote over in the book of Romans. Turn over there with me for just a moment. The way we're supposed to act whenever this happens. In Romans chapter 12, look at what he says in verse number 17. He says, repay no one evil for evil. Repay no one evil for evil. Somebody harms you, don't you live by the idea that I've got to harm them back. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men, even those who hurt you. If it be possible, he says, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves. That is to be taken even to the extent of, don't you tell anybody off just because they told you off. See what I'm saying? Don't you give them what for just because they gave you what for. He says, beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. What's that mean? Get wrath out, put something else in its place. He says, for as it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. So what do we do? What am I supposed to do? If I can't get them back, this person said this about me, this person did this to me, this person treated me in this way, I can't strike them back. What am I supposed to do, Lord? Listen, you ain't going to like it. But let me tell you what he's going to tell you to do. Look what he said. If your enemy is hungry, then you feed them. Oh, won't be near his son slapping them back, look. He says you feed him. If he's thirsty, you give him drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be, now here's the principle, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So you see, don't let resentment build up in you. It'll destroy you. It'll eat you up. If there's any repaying that needs to be done, God will do it. You can rest assured of it, and He'll not miss anything. But you know, the fourth and last principle, I think, is probably one of the biggest ones. Because what we really need to do is to apply a large dose of our grace to the faults of other people. You know, the Lord is gracious, isn't He? What do we mean by that? What we mean by that is the Lord gave us a second chance when we really didn't deserve a second chance. You know, He is a God of a second chance, isn't He? Because when man sinned and man had messed up, what did He do? He sent Jesus to redeem us. Did He have to? Did He need to? Was His arm being twisted that it should be done? No. Now, had we offended Him? You better believe it. Had we harmed Him? You better believe it. Had we hurt Him? Yes. How'd He respond? He responded with grace. Now, when we're hurt, then that's how we need to respond. You see, grace is the salve of the Spirit that heals every wound. Give unto others that grace that you yourself, as one of God's children, has received. We find that the Apostle Paul tells us in verse 16 and 17, "At my first offense no one stood with me, but all forsook me." Look at what he says. "May it not be charged against them." See that? He said, don't hold it against them, Lord. They wounded me, they hurt me, they didn't stand up for me, but I don't want them held responsible for it. Sounds like another one, doesn't it? Named Stephen. You remember that? They stoned him. He said, "Lay not this sin to their charge," which sounded like another one, which was the Master who died on the cross when He said, my God," He said, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. See, that's the kind of mercy and grace that you and I have. And who in the world would we be? What would happen to us if we withheld that mercy from someone else when they needed it from us? I'll tell you what will happen to you. You'll be lost. Because God will not forgive those who cannot or won't forgive us. You know what I think, though, we sometimes get confused with? We think forgiveness is an emotion. You know what I'm saying? We think forgiveness is an emotion. It's not. It's a declaration. Okay, somebody treats you, kills your child or whatever, and asks for your forgiveness. You're sitting there thinking, I'm supposed to forgive him, but I still feel pretty mad at him. And you're thinking in yourself, I've got to feel good to him. No, it's not merely emotional. It is a mental decision to hold nothing against them. Okay, and it's to absolve them. There was a situation up in Kentucky. Matter of fact, I read a Baton Rouge Digest of a couple whose son was killed in an automobile accident by a drunk driver. The only son they had. 17 years old. And the mother and father both just about lost their mind. And the mother had become so resentful, so hateful, that even her friends started going around her. This young man that killed them was also 17 or 18, who killed the boy in the car wreck. He wasn't even hurt, but he was also out there, and he was going to and fro, and she would follow him, waiting for him to break parole, always looking for something. And then she said one night it hit her. After having heard a sermon, guess what? She was a member of the Church of Christ, by the way, down around Franklin. And her husband had even done some preaching there at the little country congregation. And she knew that what she was feeling was wrong. To make a long story short, she and her husband went to visit the man who had killed their son. They baptized him. He goes to church with them to this very day. Now that's forgiveness. Forgiveness. By going to him, rather than hating him, by going to him and sharing with him the grace of God and extending their grace, he was so touched that he started coming to church with them. And he was baptized. And now has a family. And his wife is a member of the church. And his children are being brought up in the church. Now that's grace in action. Didn't it? So you extend that kind of grace to other people. So that's what you got to do when you feel hurt. Rather than reacting, rather than trying to strike back, put these principles to work in your life. Because, whenever you stop and you think about it, the greatest hurt that's ever been inflicted was not inflicted on me and you. It was inflicted on God when His creation sinned against Him. But yet this holy, perfect, and awesome God was able to do what? He was able to say, I love you. In spite of what you've done, I love you. And I'm going to do everything I can to redeem you from that which has held you in bondage. And see, that's the message of the cross. Get a life and love it. Learn how to deal with your hurts. Now, tomorrow night, if it be the Lord's will, we're going to talk about those moments in our life when it just don't seem worth living. You ever experienced those? Those times when you just say, I'm tired of trying to be a Christian. I just can't do it. Or things become so disgusting that